So hey, welcome for tuning in. This is Robin Wouters from Tech.eu, and I'm joined here today by Mikko Mäntylä. Mäntylä? I don't even know how to pronounce it. But he's the
Mäntylä?
president. Mäntylä? Almost got it right. So he's the president of Slush. I don't think Slush needs any introduction, but I'm still going to ask Mikko for one because you never know. Hi, Mikko.
Hi, thank you, Robin. Been looking forward to this. Really nice to be here. And Slush is we'd like to think it's the world's leading startup event. And it's run by a not-for-profit community of students. So that's what Slush is in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, indeed. I've been to many Slush events in the past. I'm not making it this year, unfortunately, but I do want you to give a little bit more of a background because, nonprofit, student-led, startup-focused event. How did it start? When did it start? Why did it start? And sort of how has it evolved over the years?
Absolutely. Sad to miss you this year, but happy to provide a bit of context. So Slush was founded in 2008, and Slush hails out of Helsinki, Finland. And back in 2008, Finland did not have much of a startup ecosystem. And in fact, like entrepreneurship as a pursuit was seen as something you do if you can't find a real job. And so there was a bunch of 5 Finnish serial entrepreneurs who thought they'd, want to start changing this. And so they created this small gathering for them and their peers to come together once a year during the fall. And I think, one important piece of kind of Slush groundwork that was laid by those founders was that they chose not to organize Slush during the relatively nice Finnish summer, but instead chose to do so during the most horrible part of the year in the fall, and then actually call the event Slush and kind of lean into everything that was horrible about that time of year. But then in 2011, something very formative for what Slush has become happened, where that original group of 5 founders had all got busy building their own companies. And they took the whole thing and they gave it over to a group of students at Aalto University who had just founded an entrepreneurship society called Aalto Entrepreneurship Society. And, that group of students took over Slush and started scaling it into the event it is today. And I think that cemented in Slush's ethos that this is not this is not anyone's own company or something that, anyone's going to turn a profit with. This is something that consecutive generations of the Finnish ecosystem come together to build for a couple of years and then hand over to the next one. And the sort of student-run part remains true to this day. So, I'm a sort of recent dropout. Our CEO Erika is a recent graduate, and a lot of our team are still studying at university, and we're all between sort of 20 and 30 years old. Since those early days, Slush's event has obviously scaled into something a little bit bigger. So these days we're a 12,000 person event. Within that 12,000, we're going to bring together 4,500 startup founders and operators, 2,500 venture capitalists. Both of those figures are kind of some of the highest of any event on the planet. And alongside that, we've also taken the platform and scaled it into a bunch of international events and some non-event digital products like our media Soak by Slush and our founder community Node by Slush. So that would be Slush in a slightly broader nutshell.
Yeah, that's a truckload of information there. Let's pick it apart a little bit. So let's talk about the student-led nonprofit part of things. Do you think that really differentiates Slush from all the other events, Web Summit, for example, which is going on this week when we're recording? Does that mean it makes it sort of a different vibe, like a different ethos or a different method of working or organizing events than most of the other ones?
Yeah, I would certainly like to think so, and I'd segment it into a couple of different things that this setup sort of allows us to do. So first of all, we're able, because we're sort of student run and by the ecosystem for the ecosystem and not for profit, we're able to make decisions that you could not make if you were a for-profit event. So for example, like Slush this year is intentionally smaller than what Slush was in 2018 or 2019 before the pandemic, which means that we're giving up some of our revenue, but what we're winning instead is a much more focused, much more serendipitous, much more sort of only the core of the ecosystem type event. And we couldn't do that if we were all just here to make a bunch of money. So that's one. Then secondly, not only are we student run, we're also to a significant extent organized by volunteers. So, if you come to Slush for the first time, one of the first things you'll notice is like 1,500 young people walking around in their white t-shirts, ready to help our guests with sort of various There's
Yeah.
things.
My favorite thing
And
about the event, by the way. That's
there we
absolutely something
go.
that people remember, right?
Exactly, and you're not the only one to have said that. So I think that again is quite a bit is quite a bit different from a lot of other events, and I think it adds to this sort of it adds to a relatively special atmosphere when you're at the event itself. And then I think lastly, the last part I would speak to is that. The people who work at Slush, including myself, are not primarily here, or certainly not for the long run here, to organize an event. We're here to learn sort of learn the fundamentals of how technology companies are built. And actually, the most common thing that people go on to do after Slush is do something meaningful within the startup ecosystem, whether that means found a company, go work for one, or perhaps go invest in some. So I think that it does give us on the organizing team a bit of a different incentive structure as well, where the foremost thing we care about is startups and the sort of incredible sort of impacts on the world you can have through them. And yes, so I think that focuses us on our core audiences, which is early stage startups.
Great. Okay, fantastic. So let's talk about something else, because you mentioned already twice now that, like, before Corona, I think the event was a lot bigger in terms of audience. I think maybe
That's right.
25 to 30,000 people at some
25,
point.
yeah.
So 25,000 people, Corona hits, everyone's struggling, especially live events for obvious reasons. You have to scale down the company, you have to lay off some people. That's very unfortunate. Then you sort of get out of Corona. We're not fully out of it, but we can do live events again. I think last year you had about 11,000 people, if I'm not mistaken.
Slightly fewer than that, 8,000.
Like
So it was a relatively
8,000.
small event.
And I do remember also a lot of people were frustrated. Like, even partner sponsors, like, couldn't get a ticket anymore. It was sold out. They were planning to go. They already had it in their calendars for months, and then they couldn't make it. Was that? And you can talk about, like, of course, this is an intentional decision to sort of scale it down. But a lot of events sort of at some point outgrow themselves and then cap the number of attendees to keep it manageable. Very few events actually scale it down intentionally, and especially by that amount, because it's less than half, right? Even this year. So. What is the driving force behind that? Of course, you give up revenue, and that's a conscious decision. I understand that, but it also means that you sort of have, I don't know, what happens next? Like, do you still grow the audience in the next few years? Do you cap it at 11,000? What's going to happen?
It's a super astute question, Robin. And as you mentioned, there's not a lot of precedent out there for events that have decided to intentionally downscale and then stay at that scale. So we're also kind of threading in unfamiliar waters here. But you're right in saying that going through COVID-19 had a profound effect on Slush. Like you mentioned, we had to cancel the 2020 event. We did unfortunately have to lay off some people, and generally we had to go through a year in which we couldn't organize event. We had to reinvent ourselves, and then figure out how do we come out of this whole mess. And as you also said, what we were able to do last December, was organize an 8,000 person event, which is a third of the size of what Slush was at its biggest. And in having to go down to 8,000 people, what we did not do is we did not materially reduce the number of startup founders, operators, and investors within that audience. So their relative share shot up, right? And I think this was a little bit lucky on our part, because actually the people we really care about, so the sort of early stage startup founders in the audience, or the people who fund those, really loved the event last year. They thought this was like Slush going back to its roots, like back to a by the ecosystem for the ecosystem gathering, back to a gathering where you can like walk around the halls of the main event and you can turn around and talk to the person like next to you in the hot dog queue, and that person may actually be super relevant for your business. I don't think you can do these things at the sort of 50, 60, 70,000 person tech conferences that also exist. So I think this reminded us that evoking change in the startup ecosystem is not about like how many people you can bring together. It's about who you can bring together. And I think you better not dilute that core that you have with a bunch of people who may not be so relevant to value creation in the ecosystem. So I think it reminded us of what Slush is about at its core. And that's going to chart our way forward. So this year's event is very intentionally, we've only scaled it to 12,000 people. And I hope I'm not going to be around to make all of these decisions going forward. But certainly, what I would do if I was is I would not grow Slush much beyond the size of this year's event. What I would do instead is just try and grow in relevance and quality within that amount, because 12,000 people is totally enough to bring together the best early stage entrepreneurs in Europe, bring together the most relevant VC funds that will fund them, and other people that are sort of important to value creation in the startup ecosystem. Like, it's totally enough. And then it just becomes a question of, specifically who those people are and what you can have them do with each other during the sort of 3 days in Helsinki. So it may very well be that we don't see a Slush beyond sort of 12,000 people for a long, long time.
Interesting. Very interesting. So we keep on talking about the event. Slush is a lot more than the event. If you go to the website, you look at the menu, you see platform, research, node, slushed. What are all of these things, and how do they relate to what you're building with the main event?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, over the past 14 years that we've been at it, clearly there have been many moments in which we've realized that maybe we can take what we do for 3 days in Helsinki in November or December, and we can turn that into something we do around the year, either physically elsewhere in the world or digitally sort of around the world, if you will. And so Slush has had new products come and go, and our current sort of lineup that you just referred to is a founder community called Node by Slush. This was something we created during the pandemic. It started off as a replacement for the main event in 2020, and it's since become a sort of community that congregates around these monthly community events that I think really augments the main event. And in fact, we've seen kind of great synergies around them. So for example, we'll have a bunch of Node by Slush founders who are going to come together at Slush 2022. They're going to have a couple of sessions there physically. So we've seen that kind of community grow. Then secondly, you mentioned Soak by Slush, which is a media, and it is a long form media that tries to distill the best European sort of pre-product market fit founder advice. So we think there's still a glaring gap in the sort of European media landscape. Although I know great brands like Tech.eu are working on this, there's still a glaring gap where there's a lot of sort of generalist technology reporting, but there's not so much specific sort of early stage startup advice, the kind that Y Combinator, First Round Review puts out in the US. There's not like a European equivalent for that, or at least not enough of it. So that's kind of what we're trying to fill in with Soaked. Then we also do some research together with folks like Atomico on the State of European Tech Report, and sometimes in-house as well. And then lastly, you mentioned Slush, which is basically Slush reinventing our strategy for international events. This is again something that happened through the pandemic, and the way we're going to scale Slush back to the sort of very physical global arena is through these independently organized sort of TEDx style, hyper local, smaller events. So for example, over the course of this year, we've had groups of sort of 50 to 150 people coming together in a few African hubs, as well as in Abu Dhabi. And then we've had slightly bigger groups of people, sort of 400, 600 people coming together in Aarhus in Denmark and Heilbronn in Germany. And that's all us figuring out how we can take what Slush has done and not sort of go and impose it on an ecosystem, but give the best parts of it to an ecosystem who can then hyper-localize it to whatever sort of their specific need at this moment in time is, and build an event around that. So that's what our other products are in brief.
Yeah, it does, to me, sound all super interesting. It also sounds like a hell of a lot of stuff to do. Like I can understand sort of the diversification, but running like a media company and an event company and sort of a franchise event and then research and a platform community, it sounds like a lot. How feasible is it for all of these things to still be around in 2-3 years?
I mean, the likely answer is that it's not very feasible for every single one of them to be around, but I think it's quite feasible for one or two of them to be around. So I think, Slush is in a position where these days we have the headcount and, we have the sort of resources to go out and sort of experiment with different ways to execute on our mission, which is, create and help entrepreneurs that change the world. And I don't think the intention is for all of these to become something. We really hope that one of them is going to become something. And the model we've taken with all of these is not to like, go out and hire a 10-person team and now have them like, keep going at building a media company for the next 10 years. It's rather like, let's go hire 1 or 2 people. Let's have them put out a couple of articles. Let's see what works, what doesn't. Let's iterate. And then if something turns out to have like the early inclination of what you might call product market fit, then let's, put a bunch of resources behind that and try and scale it. And, we've had Slush initiatives in the past that haven't worked and have been killed. Like before Soak, we had a previous attempt at a Slush media, which did not work out. At the 2018 event, we launched something called Slush Academy, which was supposed to be an educational initiative. That also no longer exists. So we've done this in the past as well, where we've dropped initiatives that for one reason or the other did not work.
Okay, I wanted to talk about the Slush team a little bit. You mentioned earlier you hope that you're not around soon, but that's also the nature of Slush. I think like a lot of people start as volunteers, maybe join the team, climb up to be CEO, but not intentional to be there for 5 or even longer. The goal is always to leave Slush and then sort of participate in the ecosystem in some way. I've seen Mickey with Walt is the best example. I think of that. But it's also, for me, it's like sort of from the outside, I like the rotation part of it. They're always nice people. They're always very competent, I think. But it also means that Slush doesn't really have a face, if you know what I mean. Like if you talk about Web Summit, there's Patty. If you talk about Noah, there's Marco. Slush doesn't really have that. And I'm guessing that's intentional. That's sort of by nature. But does that have any effect in sort of how the way the team dynamics work or how the audience perceives you?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Robin. Like the typical Slush career is, you start as a volunteer, then maybe you lead a group of volunteers, so you maybe do that for 1 more year, and then eventually become employed at Slush. Like our CEO Erica is a fantastic example of this. I think she first volunteered in 2014 as a construction volunteer, and 8 years later in 2022, she runs the whole show. And I've been here sort of as a paid employee for 3.5, a little bit over 3.5 years, and I think I actually am the most experienced person on our whole team. So that gives you a sense of like how long people stay here for. But yeah, all of this is intentional. Like it goes back to that foundational moment that I talked about where the original group of founders handed this over to a group of students. And it has been reinforced by people like Miki, who you mentioned, who was that original student who took over Slush. And what Miki did is he worked on this for 4 years. And then he said, like, that's it. I'm done. And he went off to found a growth company, Vault, which has since become a great success story. So it's kind of been cemented by decisions like that. Now, as much as it is intentional, I don't mean to claim that it doesn't come with its challenges. Like any company's like single most valuable asset is its people. So, with this model, you're like throwing away your most valuable asset every 2 or 3 years, which seems sort of nonsensical. But it is all something we give up because of a sort of greater end. And the greater end is that we can take as many people, like young people, expose them to the startup ecosystem, and then kind of throw them out into the world and have them go do more meaningful things in the startup ecosystem. It's kind of one of the ways in which we execute on our mission, which isn't very common for a company or an events company to do. And I think over the years, we've learned to, balance or sort of counteract some of the problems that come with it. So I think we've grown better at always retaining a certain amount of people between years so that we don't sort of suffer from this organizational Alzheimer's. And then also I think we've grown better at how do we train people who come in to as quickly as possible be able to execute on what they need to do. And I do think, just last point I want to make, I think this is specifically why Slush is such a good sort of founder school, because like every year Slush goes through this scaling phase where we start with sort of 15 or 20 people in January and we end up with, well, currently we're 47 paid employees. So we've like grown 3x between January and now, which is exactly the pace at which like the best growth companies out there grow. So we go through that scaling phase every single year, which means again, like a new generation after another gets to experience the sort of pains that come with hyperscaling a company. So it also like it's not easy, but it does have I think benefits that outweigh the challenges.
Fantastic. Well, interesting points. How much does Slush tie into the Finnish startup ecosystem and vice versa? Because it's very difficult to untangle those. But if you would have a guess, like what was most responsible, the Finland's startup ecosystem for growing Slush, or Slush for sort of putting Finland on the map for many investors, top talent joining companies there because they went to the conference, etc. What do you think happened in the last 10 years?
Yeah,
Summarizing.
it's a good question. Absolutely. I mean, Finland is a country of 5.5 million people, and the sort of capital region around Helsinki is an area of 1 million people. So, we all know each other, and it's a very small ecosystem. But your question stands, which is, what caused what? And, clearly it's this sort of dynamic interplay between Slush and the ecosystem, like both have benefited from each other. What I will say, though, is like in 2011, when Mickey took over Slush from that original group of founders, what his and his team did was basically like formulate a Slush's mission or Slush's goal to create a startup ecosystem within Finland. And they broke that down into 3 goals. First, creating sort of radically positive attitudes towards entrepreneurship. Secondly, profiling Finland and the Nordics as a leading tech hub globally. And thirdly, increasing the availability of capital, especially international venture capital. Now, come sort of 2020, like at the end of Slush's first decade, we basically stopped and had a look against these original goals. Like, how did we do? If you take that first one, like building radically positive attitudes towards entrepreneurship, I think there's a story of one of those original founders, Peter Westerbacka, in 2007, giving a lecture at a local university here in the Helsinki region. And he was lecturing to a group of 600 people. And he asked, like, how many of you are planning to start a company? Raise your hand. And according to the story, 3 out of 600 raised their hand. So that's it's less than that's half a percent. Now, more recently, we've actually polled Finnish youth on how many of them plan to found a company, and the number is closer to 40% now. So that's like 80x growth in the span of a decade. When we talk about profiling the Nordics as a major tech hub, like you can go and read the State of European Tech Report, and you'll find that whether you rank ecosystems in Europe by like venture capital invested or unicorns produced per capita or any of these metrics that you can sort of use to rank ecosystem, you'll find that both Helsinki and Stockholm, often Malmö, sometimes Copenhagen, sometimes Espoo here in Finland, rank among the sort of top 20. So we certainly made material progress against that goal. And then lastly, when it comes to increasing the availability of venture capital, between 2011 and 2020, venture capital invested in Finnish startups grew 9x, and international venture capital grew 19x, which is huge, sort of it's an exceptional pace. So it would be naive to claim that Slush has sort of caused all of this change. Again, it's an interplay between the two, but I'll certainly say that Slush's existence coincides with the creation of a startup ecosystem in Finland, and so I don't think our impact has been immaterial by any means. And these days, we're very proud to hail out of a city with a very prosperous startup ecosystem that's given birth to companies like Rovio or Supercell, or more recently Ivan or Aura or Vario or Swappy, or all of these wonderful growth companies.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, I'm gonna miss the next Slush event, as I mentioned. Unfortunately, the FOMO is already starting. It's in about 2 weeks. We're recording this on 4th of November. What am I gonna miss? What to expect? Like, what are the like sort of the highlight speakers? What are some of the things that you're doing that you didn't do in previous years?
Absolutely. So, at the highest level, what you're going to miss is the most relevant Slush to date. And that speaks to both the people who will be there and what those people will be doing with each other. So if we start with the people who are there, like obviously there's the highlights, the speakers. There's Eb Williams who's founded Twitter and Medium and a bunch of other companies. There's Max Levchin, who was one of the original founders of the company that became PayPal and more recently founder and CEO of Affirm. There is Lucy Guo, who was founder of Scale AI, a sort of wonderful defining company in the AI space. There is Doug Leone, the longtime global managing partner of Sequoia Capital. There's Mar Hershenson, who's founding partner of Pear VC, who has more recently become.
Right, stop it, Mikko. The FOMO's building, so stop it. Don't do it.
I'll stop the list of speakers. Yeah, but then it's not only like. At Slush, it's not only about like who's stepping on stage. Like there are a lot of events with wonderful speakers around the world. It's very much about who's there at the event as well. And if we talk about VCs, I already said there's going to be 2,600 investors at Slush. Within those, we actually in January we mapped out the best 70 venture capital funds on the planet, and we set ourselves like we set out to attract as many of them as possible. The number we landed at is 45. So like 45 of the 70 best VC funds in the world are gonna be at Slush. And that means that funds like, Benchmark Capital or Founders Fund or Tiger Global are gonna visit Slush for the first time ever. Equally on
really? That's actually quite a surprise. I think those funds already had Slush on their radar, at least.
They did not. I mean, some of these are very evasive. Like I think Tiger is, they're just busy, sort of in investing out of New York, and Benchmark on the other hand is a very small team who don't go to events. So yeah, they haven't been before. They'll be here this year, and many others with them. And then there's also the entrepreneurs, like the early stage founders, and I think we have every single startup who comes to Slush apply so that we can verify that they actually are a startup. I've seen many of those applications, and I can verifiably say that the best early stage entrepreneurs in Europe are coming here. And it's also partly in thanks to some new initiatives we're doing this year. Like the Slush 100 pitching competition, which is a 10-year-old initiative, but this year will be augmented by a €1 million equity investment in the winner by 5 of the best VC funds on the planet. So Excel, General Catalyst, Lightspeed, NEA, and Northzone. So I think those have helped pull in some people. And then lastly, I'll mention that every year's Slush has a theme which informs the way we build the event. This year's theme is Break of Dawn, and it claims that we're going to look back on the 2020s as a period of time when an incredible number of important technologies were created. And it breaks down into a bunch of different industries that we think are at these turning points. One of them is Web3. So we're going to have a Web3 sort of pre-event on day 0 called Open Protocol. That's something we haven't done before. Equally, in our startup studio, which is the stage where early stage startups get on stage, we're going to have something we call Product Showcase, and Product Showcase is going to be broken down into 9 break of dawn industries. So we're going to have the people working on new materials, or on food tech, or on space, or on AI, or all of these sort of industries that we think are at these pivotal turning points. We're going to have them be on stage. So I hope that paints a picture of what you're going to miss.
Yeah, it sounds like I'm going to miss quite a lot, but I'm hoping to at least catch some of it online, or get reports from the people who go. Final question for you: What's next for you? What do you think is going to happen after your Slush days? Yeah,
it's a pertinent question for anyone at Slush, because you're like your expected exit date is always close. For me, I actually know that this is my last year at Slush. So 31st of December will be my last day working for Slush. And I basically joined Slush, as you do as a second-year university student, dreaming of these sort of obvious things that you dream of, like management consulting or things. 4 years later, I have no interest in becoming a management consultant anymore. In fact, I can't imagine anything more boring. What I want to do instead is, or what's happened is, I've just fallen in love with this like special pocket of the world called the startup ecosystem, where like young people very sort of meritocratically and efficiently go out and solve problems that they're passionate about, and actually have a good shot of like making a dent in those problems in quite a short period of time. So that's what I want to do. I want to found a technology company, and I do want to hopefully sort of do what some previous Slush alumni like Miki have done, and build something that sort of raises the ambition level in the Finnish ecosystem, and sets the standard for what consecutive generations of Slushers can go out and do. So that's what's in store.
Fantastic. Well, wishing you all the best, of course, and we'll be watching from the sidelines both what happens with your career, but also what happens with Slush next. So again, I'm sad not to be there in person, but I'm wishing you all the best for the event. I'm sure the next 2 weeks are going to be quite crazy for you. So we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for taking the time, Mikko, and again, wishing you all the best.
Thank you so much, Robin. This was fun.